guest today is a father of five, an attorney, a poet who recently published his first collection of poems. He's a podcaster and an actor and starred in a music video for The Killers for their 2018 song titled Rut. His mother died suddenly and unexpectedly when he was 10 years old. It's only been in the last few years that he started to become aware of the traumas that he suffered as a result, and began writing poetry again after a 20-year gap to work through the feelings that remained from that loss. He believes that men are often messing up their lives by abandoning themselves to fit in with others, and he believes that we fix that by learning who we are and taking ownership of the power in our uniqueness. He's currently working to integrate his shadow and says the most alpha attribute in him is that he is learning to be an example of healthy vulnerability.
If you're a man that controls his own destiny, a man that is always in the pursuit of being better, you are in the right place. You are responsible. You are strong. You are a leader. You are a force for good. Gentlemen, this is the Alpha Quorum.
Welcome back to the Alpha Quorum Show. Brad Singletary here. So excited today to have a guest from out of town. We have Scott Edgar here, who's come down from Utah. He's an attorney practicing there in a solo practice in Utah, and father of five children. He's got some really special talents and some cool things that he does in his life that we hope that he'll share with us today. So everybody, welcome Scott Edgar.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here, brother.
Glad to be here.
So you're down here for the weekend. You're just doing the weekend in Vegas, kind of down here to party a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know how much I party, but I came down, a buddy of mine, big Elvis fans, and so I came down to watch that new Elvis movie that came out. And
do you have a costume to wear in the theater?
No, I don't, unfortunately. I have sunglasses, but
How was the movie?
the movie was fabulous.
Oh, nice.
It was, I thought it was really well done, crafted really well, and the kid who played Elvis was phenomenal.
I didn't even know that was going on.
You got to
so
go see
behind the times on stuff like that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. So we came down to watch that, and he and I are just been hanging out. I haven't seen him in about 4 years, but so it's been fun.
So you lived in Vegas at one point. That's how you have these connections here, like with Jimmy?
Yeah. So in 1995, I served an LDS mission in the Philippines, got home in 1995, and my folks had moved to Henderson in the meantime. I left for my mission from Hawaii, and they moved here. So I had 2 years in Hawaii, 2 years in the Philippines, and then to the desert. And I got here and I'd wake up in the morning with dry throat. I mean, just like all the moisture from my body after 4 years in the tropics and coming to the desert. It was horrible. But so I came here. I was here for about a year and a half. Then I moved up to Utah. But that's how I think, Jimmy, you, my little sister, used to babysit for you guys.
Yeah. That was a great time, and we've always stayed connected. And she reached out and said that Scott was starting a new podcast and getting back into his poetry and his writings. And I listened to after you'd done your first episode, and then kind of reached out to you, Brad, of like, I think where Scott's going and what he's been through and that experience, and starting to glean the wisdom, being able to kind of look back on what he's been through and how the pieces started to kind of connect. And that really exploration for you and the discovery process for you is relatively new.
Yeah.
And it made sense to me to kind of get him on to.
Well, for sure, fellow podcaster, author, poet, attorney. So glad to have you here, man. Tell us about your podcast. I've listened to some of those episodes and it's quite good.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's called The Poet Delayed, and the delayed part means I've always written poetry since high school on, but I look back at that poetry and I wrote that poetry almost to convince myself to be the person that I thought I should be. So my poetry, I would write it and it was not really authentic. It was always putting a positive spin or I thought this is what I should write. I should write this. And I can't have an ending that's dark or depressing because I should be positive. And so I wrote a lot of poetry, and frankly, it was, I look back at it now and, I don't really, I've never really shared it with many people, and it just doesn't feel authentic. And, but I still wrote it, and I went for about, there was about a 20-year period there where I didn't write at all. There was just some stuff going on in my life, that was massively hard for me. And I didn't write any poetry really. I'd write a few here and there. And then a couple of years ago, issues in my life really came to a head to where I thought, where I had no choice but to actually face them now and do the hard stuff to fix the pain and the difficulty I had in making decisions in my life. And so a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago, in fact, probably about October of 2019, I started really thinking about these things. And then I thought, I'm going to start writing again. And the poetry that I've been writing since then, in my opinion, is much more authentic, much more, what I used it for was to really explore these feelings that I had. And as I did that, it was amazing to me how figuring out, as I was writing this poetry, figuring out how to express myself in metaphors and similes, and it helped me understand my problems. It didn't solve them, but it helped me to see them in a different light. It gave me a different lens to look through. And I was able to break it down and kind of understand more what I was dealing with. And so the poetry has really been central to me figuring this stuff out. And so I published a book about a month ago, self-published on Kindle. And I had a friend of mine, his wife was helping me format it. And she said, "Hey, you should do a podcast." And I thought, that's kind of cool. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. Of your poetry, she said. And so, I've got this great therapist up there in Utah, and I was talking to her about it, and she said, "You know what? That would be awesome. And you can have guests on and you can talk about your poetry and basically be vulnerable." She said, "The world needs more men being vulnerable, sharing their stories."
Amen.
And so I thought, that's kind of a cool idea. And so I just did it. And, I've got, I think, I actually recorded one last night with my buddy here. And I think that was the 8th one I've done. And then we did a bonus review of the Elvis movie.
Nice.
Yeah, that'll be out tomorrow morning. But so it's been really good for me because, as you two probably can attest to, being vulnerable and sharing your story is healing in and of itself. And it's acknowledging that, this is what I got going on, man. And not feeling like you have to protect stuff anymore. You can take your walls down, It was fascinating. Earlier, you mentioned that your poetry, it was always this positive spin, and it was this, you thought that was the intended purpose or whatever. Yeah. And then you came to some realization that it didn't have to be that way, or it could be more raw, more real, purer to your feelings and whatever. And what was that process like? I'm curious about why you thought it had to be pleasant. Here's why, because I needed it to be pleasant. I was trying to pretend like things weren't bad, that I was telling myself a story. In fact, it all comes back, like, for instance, my old journals too were the same thing. I would write in my journal almost like propaganda to myself, like, hey, today is so great. Today is, or if I was having a day, today's a bad day, but it's going to be positive. I wasn't honest with myself. And so I think it was more of not necessarily feeling like it has to be positive. That was part of it. But I think the bigger part was I need to tell myself that it's not that way. I need to pretend that things are better than they are. There was a lot of imagery in my original poetry of darkness, night coming on, but then always the sunrise. Always. And I wrote this one poem. I wrote a poem now called Forgotten Walls. And I addressed it in one of my podcasts as well. I read that and discussed it with a friend of mine. And Forgotten Walls was me realizing, oh, there's walls around me preventing me from, I'm all walled in. And so the poem is, and so I realize it. And so now I'm going to take these walls down. But the end of the poem is me getting exhausted, making no progress on getting the wall down, despite all my efforts. And then the end of the poem is me being exhausted and the fog coming back in and covering the walls, and I forget about them. So I don't get out. I'm still in the wall, and despite my efforts, because I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea how to attack the walls. I don't have any. So it's like Sisyphus, pushing the rock up, back down, up, back down. And so I'm trying to really address these things, because that's been my life really for the last, how am I, 48? For the last 38 years, at least. My mom passed away when I was 10. I know for the last 38 years, it's been a process of, I got to attack this, because I've always understood that I've got problems going on, but I've never understood what it was, only that I had a problem. And I was always scared to talk to people about it. So I could never figure it out. I couldn't get outside of that. I had this closed loop in my head, or I'm just trying to figure stuff out in my head. I got this echo chamber in another example, it's just bam, 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 trying to figure it out. But it's not until I got out of my head and talked to somebody else, really talked to somebody else, that I started to see, okay, all right, there is a big problem. And more importantly, I can do something about it rather than just putting Band-Aids on it and trying to pretend like I'm okay, because I wasn't.
Where did you learn, and at what age, that it wasn't okay or safe to talk to someone else? Like, where did that programming come from?
I don't exactly know a date. I mean, I can look back and I can think of things. I think it was a gradual process. But I think it was a gradual process that happened over time. I can't pinpoint it, but I can tell you that, so my mom, like I said, my mom passed away when I was 10, and
which is a major blow.
Huge.
Okay.
Huge.
And at the worst age possible.
Yeah. And so she passed away when I was 10. My dad was single for 6 years. He had 7 kids from the age of 6 months to 13 years old. So he had quite a task in front of him. And, I'm a father of 5 now, and and he was in the Air Force, which is a very demanding job. And so I can understand that was very difficult, but it was also hard to talk to him. He was not the touchy-feely, lovey guy. I know he loved us, but he had a lot going on, and I didn't feel like I could talk to him about it. And there was a lot
because it would overburden him more, like you were protecting him, or he wouldn't respond well.
Well, more that I was protecting him. I was very defensive of my dad. I mean, no father's perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes. My dad wasn't perfect, but when I was a kid, I wanted him to be perfect in my mind. I wanted to feel safe, I think. And so I was very defensive of him. And I think, so to answer your question, Jimmy, I kind of just turned inward, and I made the decision that I'm not going to talk about it because that's going to create chaos. And I tried to avoid chaos my whole life.
And what was your birth order?
I'm number 3.
Okay.
And 3 out of 7. But so that was a big part of me. So to answer your question about when did I realize it's not safe to talk to other people, I think I probably would answer that by saying, more accurately, I was just trying to avoid chaos, because if I acknowledged that things were not well, then I had to address it. And so rather than doing that, I just pretended like things were well. I pretended like I was okay because, when you're a kid, you can do that pretty well. And I get now why I did that. I look back now, I think I was vulnerable. I was vulnerable in the sense that I could be, that I was not strong. And so, I needed that when I was a kid to pretend that way. That's how I coped with it. It was, when you're a kid, it's a positive coping mechanism to draw back into yourself. But when you get older, this is what I'm learning. When you get older, those positive coping mechanisms become a detriment to you, and it really came to a head when I got married, because you can't do that anymore when you're married and have a functioning, working marriage. And so that's really when the shit hit the fan for me, is like, okay, what am I going to do? And I still didn't know how to get it myself. And so it just got worse and worse and worse.
You said you talked to someone. Was that like a professional, a friend? You finally opened up and kind of talked to someone or something you mentioned there?
Yeah, I really didn't start talking to somebody honestly and openly until about 2.5 years ago, when I got this, the therapist that I'm with now. I'd seen therapists before, but more of just to show that, look, I'm doing something,
doing my part.
Yeah, look at me.
Diligence. Yeah,
take the walls down here. I'm going to therapy.
Yeah, exactly. But in therapy, I feel like before, when I wasn't really making progress, I kind of felt like what I was doing was, when I look back at it now, I think, I was going in, talking to this therapist, knowing what I could say for them to be impressed with my progress.
This is all a performance kind of itself.
Oh yeah. It was a performance. Exactly.
Look how healthy I am.
Yeah, exactly.
In spite of my difficulty, look at me now.
Yeah. I recognize my difficulty, therapist. I recognize, and look at me, I'm profound because I understand the problem. And I know what, because I knew it, even though I didn't admit it to myself. I knew it, and I knew what I needed to do, but I would not acknowledge it.
So going through the intellectual process, but not the emotional process.
Yes. And that's been a big part of my life. Is I've always been able to understand the issues, but the problem was I was intellectually dishonest with myself, to where I would acknowledge it and I could break it down and I could see it logically and intellectually, but I was not intellectually honest enough with myself to admit that I had that problem, that it was worse than it was.
Okay. So I'm interested in, as a man, being able to reach out for help, realize that I'm struggling, I'm in this hole, and the blockage of wanting to say or admit that I do need help. Because that's real. I mean, I fell into that same pattern. It manifested through a drug addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the construct was that if I admit, because I knew I was in deep, deep trouble, and there was evidence all over my life. But the construct in my head was that if I had reached out for help, if I admitted that I need help, I also had to admit that I was broken, bad, wrong, lacked the moral fortitude, and weak. And I, as a man, there was no way, because of what I was seeing in my dad, what I was seeing in other males, what I had learned. Does that resonate?
Yeah, to an extent. I would, for me, I would say that I felt broken. I knew I was broken. And I guess I'll say it like this. In my intimate relationships, like in people closest around to me, like my wife especially, there was no hiding that I was broken with her. I mean, and there was no trying to deny it to her face that I was broken. I was broken, and she knew it. I knew it. And so I readily accepted that with her, in vain. I mean, it wasn't a productive acceptance, because rather than doing what I needed to do, I would do what I thought she wanted me to do. And so it was not productive. But so I acknowledged it to her the bigger issue though, outside of that, it resonates with me more with what other people thought, what other people would look and see. I have a personality where people enjoy being around me. I mean, I was a people pleaser. So people like to be around people pleasers, and people liked me and they want to be around me. And that would upset her because she felt like she knew who I really was. So, I mean, it was just a horrible dynamic, but people, I was concerned about, I was concerned about people knowing the extent of my problems. Now, I didn't struggle with drug addiction ever, alcohol, nothing like that. I mean, I struggled with pornography a little bit. Well, not even a little bit. I mean, it was an issue. It wasn't a chasing after it every day or every week, but when I got into it, it was like a time warp,
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an issue. And I would talk to some close friends of mine about it, but I would always try to make it less than it was, yeah, it's a problem, but it's not that big of a problem, And so to your question, if I resonated with that, yeah, I mean, I wanted people to consider me competent, confident, and because that's something I've always struggled with in my life. I'm an attorney. People find out I'm an attorney and they think, oh, he's just, I know what, but I've never felt like an attorney. I go to these conferences and I feel less than, I feel like an imposter. We hear the imposter syndrome. Completely felt like an imposter. I'd see these other attorneys talking and I'm just like, I just feel so out of place, And so I would try to like acknowledging all that stuff would just like make that worse, maybe make that imposter feeling type worse. And so I would try to acknowledge just a little bit of it, but not all of it. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I was curious when you talked about being broken, what that meant. And you mentioned, some addictive type stuff there a little bit, but what else do you mean when you say you were broken and you knew it, your wife knew it, people knew it, but you couldn't really talk about it yet?
What I meant by broken was that I feel like I was on a treadmill, and this is part of it. One aspect is I felt like that I was on a treadmill and somebody was increasing the speed faster than I could run. And I didn't want to admit that I couldn't run that fast. And so I just tried to keep it up. And I kept falling. And so part of being broken was that I was afraid to admit that I couldn't do things because I didn't feel confident who I was. I lacked self-confidence. I didn't know who I was. And so the broken part was that I was just trying to be who people wanted me to be and not who I was. And that's a big part of my recovery, is getting down to who I am. And the broken part comes in that because I didn't know who I was, I tried to be who everybody else was, or who everybody else thought or wanted me to be. And so I had a hard time telling people no. I had a hard time acknowledging that I can't do that, because somebody would say, yeah, you be like this. And I would, in my mind, I would go, that is a good way to be. So I'm going to do whatever I can to be that way, because that's a good way to be. And I never once stopped and thought, yeah, maybe that's a good way to be, but maybe that's not who I am. And so rather than trying to be that way, why don't I find out who I am? Because there's other good ways to be. There's not just one good way to be. And, in my first episode of my podcast, I quoted an E.E. Cummings poem. It says, "May I be I is the only prayer, not maybe good or great," or, he says some other things there. But that is kind of, for me right now, to overcome my brokenness. It is, I'm trying to understand who I am. I'm trying to understand what I am, because I need to have that foundation before I can build any other really, before I can be a a benefit to other people. Before I can have solid foundations externally, I have to have that internal foundation myself. And as I've explored that, I know that I've come to the realization I don't have to have a perfect individual foundation, personal foundation, but my being aware of that and honest with myself about it and striving to do that, that's a foundation in and of itself, while I'm getting to that point of knowing who I am.
Dude, I am shocked to hear you say just the way you're sitting here with some celebrity style, like swagger, you've got this ultra confidence. It just emanates from you. I mean, it's wild just to hear that you didn't really know who you were. You were living this kind of false self, and that you had to come to this. How in the world? I'm curious about that process. How did you get here?
Can I say one thing before you go there, though?
Yeah.
Because you said before I can be of benefit, and I want to smash that.
Smash it. Call me out.
You are of benefit right now. Your willingness to share, to be vulnerable. That is the ingredients to build the structure. And that can happen in this moment. So I want to acknowledge that, because you shared about your mom. You shared about the pornography. You shared about the struggles that you're going through. And that level of vulnerability, that level of rigorous honesty is what creates an environment where Scott can be of benefit. And so to hear you say, like, before I can be of benefit, like, smash that, because I want you to walk with an attitude and have that gratitude that I am on the path. I am in recovery, and recovery is a way of living. Recovery means that I'm willing to come and sit with two dudes in front of a microphone and open up my heart, and that's it. So you are of benefit. Well,
and that was actually what you just expressed is what I was trying to express by saying that I understand now that I don't have to have a complete foundation yet. Just what you just said, just the process of accepting that, the process of acknowledging that, you know what, I am screwed up and I can fix it. One of my favorite quotes, I think it was Jordan Peterson. He said, "You are not your problems. You are that which, if it faces its problems, can overcome its problems." And that's I thought that was beautiful. And he got that from, I've been reading a lot of existentialist philosophy lately, and he got it. I don't know if he got it from Nietzsche or who he got that, but I read that like in some other writing. I read that somewhere or something similar, but I love that. You are not your problems. You're not. You are that which can overcome your problems if you turn around and you face them. And so right now I'm taking my problems on, and I know I'm not doing perfectly, but I'm okay with that because I'm open and I'm willing to do it. And like you just said, Jimmy, I 100% concur with that the process of going through it, I've acknowledged it and I am trying to build it. And so I don't have to wait till I'm perfectly whole, just by doing it. And that's really the purpose of my podcast is, hey, I'm hoping that people can hear it and think, you know what? I can talk about it too. Here's this guy. He's talking about it. Your podcast is that same way. I've listened to a number of your episodes. It's okay to be broken. We all are broken. And to pretend like you're not is counterproductive because you are broken. You're not your problems, but you're broken and you can do something about it. When you talk about working on it, what does that look like? So if we're watching you on a TV show, what are we seeing you do that looks like you working on stuff? Are you got therapy you mentioned? Yep. I mean, you have a fitness regimen, you have a spirituality, you have some service. Like what kinds of things do you do to work on yourself? I make my bed every day.
Nice.
I love it. I keep my room clean. Those are some Jordan Peterson staples.
Yeah.
I do, and those things I think are so important. Keep some level of control in my life because I can't control everything, but I control that. And my writing, I try to write every day. I try to do that. And I mean, there's a lot of things that I want to do that I need to do better, like exercise, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what I'm working on doing better, because I'm, relatively speaking, this is all new to me, but having a daily schedule, bed at the same time, get up at the same time every day. And, a big thing is I'm reading more.
Mm-hmm.
What I've found as I've read is there's a lot of good ideas out in the world. And I don't know how to get them. I think we need to expose ourselves. I'll speak for me. I need to expose myself to more ideas, because there's people out there who, and the way I refer to it as is looking at my problems through different lenses, because I have looked at my problem through one specific lens my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what to do with it, because I think, okay. And so I'm trying to make sense of everything through one lens, but now I've got these different ideas, and I'm looking at it like through existentialist philosophy, for instance, through Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and Albert Camus. And those are the three that I've been reading just recently. And there are so many different ways to work on our problems. And so reading, and actually another great thing is getting on YouTube. They've got these like 5, 10, 15 minute videos about this stuff that you can watch, and it'll kind of give you a breakdown of it. And then you can go from there. I want more about this. And having those different lenses to look at this through gives you different ways to come at problems. And that's been huge for me.
So you're seeking perspective. That's
good
what
idea.
You're doing. You're saying, like, I want to look at this in different ways. I want to see my life through different lenses. And you do that through philosophers and other authors and different folks that have different perspective.
Yeah, that's one. And not just philosophers, but just good literature.
Right.
Good literature. Like one of my favorite books is East of Eden by Steinbeck. That book, I think that book, I have this thing. I've felt that, if we read like the great literature that stood the test of time, I think that will be better for you than all the self-help books in the world, because that literature has stood the test of time because it resonates with humankind, with human beings. And at East of Eden, there's a concept in there where they're talking about the Hebrew word timshel. That's a big focus of the book. And it's from the book of Genesis, when Cain, there's a chapter in Genesis where God's talking to Cain, and he's saying, you can overcome, or he started talking to Abel, I think it was. And he says, yeah, you can overcome your problems, or not your problems, but you can rule over sin, basically. And then in one translation, it's thou shalt, like you're commanded to do it, or you will do it, predestined. But then they break down this Hebrew word, and thou mayest. So it's not that you are predestined. It's not a commandment to do it, but thou mayest. And I love that you know what? We're not, we can figure it out for ourselves, individually. But so my point just is that getting these different perspectives is huge.
It's amazing to me, your connection to language. That one word changes a biblical story itself. And you learned that through East of Eden, John Steinbeck.
Yeah.
But as an attorney, I'm guessing you do a lot with language. Words really, really, really matter. Punctuation and all of those, that matters. But a single word. And so I wonder how your language is different. One of my favorite things is I work with men, and I only know a few who do this. Taco Mike, Jimmy Durbin is one of them. I'm a dirtbag. I'm an idiot. I'm a failed, flawed person and so that's a different language, because before you were protective of your insecurities and you didn't want those to show. And now you're out here telling the world on microphones.
Wait, you're publishing this?
I'm broken. So I don't know. I guess I have a few thoughts in that one long question, but how is your language different?
That's a good question because it is different. I try to be very careful about the words that I use. I try to be specific when I talk. I will pause a lot as I try to think of the right word because words do have meaning. And, English language, all language, the language is imperfect because there's not a word to express every emotion. But I try to find the closest word because I want to be clear. But I think the biggest part that how my language has changed is talking more positively to myself.
The self-talk.
Self-talk, because I'll give you a scenario. Mornings are hard for me. I wake up in the morning from the moment this doesn't happen every morning, but it happens a lot of mornings. My eyes open and immediately this parade of horribles goes marching through my head. All my problems. And I don't want to get out of bed. And I feel sick and I'm scared of what's coming. And usually if I get up and get going, that goes away. And I see things in the proper perspective. I'm like, wait a second, let's weigh this stuff. It's not as bad as you think it is. And you can deal with it. But when I wake up, it's horrible. It's hard. And what I would do to counter that, to get rid of the pain, what I've done so often growing up and not even that long ago is I would just start railing on myself. You're an idiot. You're stupid. Why'd you get yourself? And I would just start tearing myself apart. And that would cause a numbness to come on me. And so the language, how it's changed is I try really hard not to do that. And in fact, sometimes I've just stopped myself like, whoa, stop. What are you doing? I've said that to myself. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. I've developed this, I call it the Carl Malone method. I don't know if you guys, you remember when Carl Malone was
mailman.
The mailman, he's being interviewed. Hey, Carl Malone's going to make a lot of points tonight. Carl Malone, he talked about himself in third person. Yeah. And so what I do, and this has been so helpful for me, and I don't, and it, and I am understanding now that this is actually a technique, that people do. I will imagine my emotionally healthy self who's not dealing with all these problems. I will imagine myself coming to me and I will talk to myself. I say, Scott, it's not as bad as you think it is. And I will tell myself truths that I know, but I've forgotten or I'm not thinking about. In fact, this poem that I want to read a little bit, it addresses that, where I will still just talk to myself. Hey, and I will have a conversation with myself, and I'm there for myself. I'm coming there and I am being there for myself because, I'm sure you've all experienced this in your mind. It's true. What is true, but sometimes your body forgets it. And there's so much trauma stored in our bodies that our bodies hurt. And so, like for me, there are times when I'm willing to throw everything I know away to stop the pain in my body, to stop the trauma bond, all the stuff. Is to stop that. I'm willing to throw it all away and abandon myself. But that's not going to fix anything.
It was interesting because as you were talking about your parade of madness and the verbal assault, I immediately thought of cutting. Mm-hmm. You weren't physically cutting yourself,
right?
But that's essentially the same effect to numb the pain.
Yep.
And there's this saying of, tell me, don't show me. In other words, if you're hurting, tell me rather than cutting yourself to show me that you're hurting. And the interesting thing with your internal verbal assault is there isn't a show.
Right.
It's all encapsulated inside your body, and that's scary.
I'm emotionally cutting, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And because that's been my whole MO is that I don't want to show it. I don't want to show people. I want to show people. So that was beneficial. I've told my kids, I said, listen, if you guys are hurting or if you're worried about something, come and talk to me. It's no judgment. Just talk to me because you don't have to be scared alone. You don't have to be worried alone. Because when I was a kid, I stressed and I was terrified at times, and I didn't think I could talk to anybody about it because.
Well, you didn't want to add more chaos to the system.
Yes.
And that same pattern keeps showing up.
Yes.
Decade after decade after decade. And it'll fail.
In addition to the not wanting to show chaos, I'm understanding now too that I didn't feel like I was worth that time. And that is just not true. Regardless, I mean, maybe somebody doesn't want.
Glad to hear you say that.
Yeah. Maybe somebody doesn't want to value me. Maybe they don't want to value me, but that has no bearing on whether or not I have value, because I do. It's intrinsic. We all do. And if somebody wants to dismiss me for whatever reason, then
that's on them.
That's on them. It has no bearing on who I am. But I didn't understand that as a little kid. As a little kid, I was scared. Like after my mom died, and I've mentioned this on my podcast as well. So there was a period of time, I don't know, a month or so, I couldn't sleep at night. And I would lay there in bed, terrified in the dark, like absolutely terrified. All I had to do was go wake my little brother up or go upstairs and talk to my dad, or my grandma was living with us for a little while. But I never did that because I didn't want to bother some people. I didn't want to bother people. And I would go to bed at like 5 or 6, hoping to fall asleep before everybody else. But all that resulted in was me being awake and listening to everybody else going to bed, So that's just an example of how important it is to get outside of yourself and go talk to somebody. Because had I talked to somebody, then I know they would have been sensitive to me. Somebody would have. My siblings would have, I know that. But I didn't feel like I was valuable enough that I was worth waking them up. They're asleep. I don't want to bother them.
You talk about this conversation that you have with yourself. I'm wondering, is this a visualization? Is this the kind of thing, you learn in therapy? Is this, does this happen every day? Is this an ongoing dialogue that you're having? Are you facing yourself and looking into your own eyes? Like, what does that
good question
movie look like?
Well, first of all, I kind of just instinctively started doing it. I've learned since that is a therapeutic technique. Mm-hmm. In fact, I also sometimes will go to my 10-year-old self who can't sleep at night.
Love it.
And I will go sit down on the bed with myself, and I get emotional. I mean, there are times when I've imagined myself going and sitting down with my 10-year-old self, and I just weep. And I don't really say anything sometimes too. I just sit there. With myself, and I'm awake, and me and my 10-year-old self are just sitting there, and I'm just comforting myself.
Thank you for sharing that.
It's powerful. And if people, if there's anybody listening to this who has traumatic experiences in their life, in your head, I would recommend going and sit with yourself, being there with yourself when this is happening, whatever's happening to you. It's healing, I think. I mean, talking about it right now, I feel emotional because it's so powerful. And so it is a visualization, to answer your question specifically. I imagine myself coming and just being with me, and I can see myself looking at me in the eye and just saying, "Hey, Scott, you're going to be okay." And I'll say to myself, imagine that these parade of horribles that are marching through your head, imagine that they are all true. What's the worst that can happen? And I talk to myself about what's the worst that can happen. Mm-hmm. So you lose everything. There's still going to be air to breathe. There's still going to be water to drink, food to eat. There are people that love you. You're going to be okay. And I start to understand, okay, a lot of this fear that I have is really fear of the social constructs that have been imposed that now I'm judging myself by, that really have absolutely zero bearing on my worth, on myself. I mean, who cares what your credit score is? That doesn't mean you're a poor person, and who cares? Yeah.
It's good to know.
Yeah, well, the narrative. Jimmy wanted me to tell you about that. No, but there's so many things. And that's one thing that I've really had to sit down and convince myself of. There's so many things that I stress about, that I only stress about because of what other people think. And in fact, there's this great quote by Benjamin Franklin. where he talks about that. I've got it here on my phone. I'm going to quote it exactly because it's such a great quote. And it's something that I've tried to remind myself of every day because it's so easy, and not just easy. I think it's instinctive that we judge ourselves by what other people think. And he said this. He said, "This is Benjamin Franklin. The eyes of other people are the eyes that ruin us. If all but myself were blind, I should want neither fine clothes, fine houses, nor fine furniture."
Dang.
Genius.
Go Benji.
Wow.
Yeah. Good old Benji. He's my first cousin. Some things to remove, by the way. We got a similar grandpa. But I love that because, and we're not just talking about like material objects. I mean, you can say the same thing about like your credit score. Who gives a shit what your credit score is? Mm-hmm. There's no bearing on who you are. I mean, people, and the only reason I live up in Davis County, Utah. If anybody knows about Davis County, Utah, I mean, my kids go to Davis High School. You walk through the parking lot and there's, pretty nice cars in the Davis High School parking lot, and so it can be easy to feel inferior. And I'm not making a judgment on these people because there's a lot of great people up there, but still there's a lot of wealth in that county.
Yeah. I used to live up there. I used to work in Farmington.
Oh, did you? Yeah. My office is in Farmington, but there's a lot of wealth there. And I'm not making a value judgment on these people because I know a lot of good people up there.
It's just material for the self to judge.
Yes. When you look at it, you think, oh, I don't have that, And so it's easy to be hard on yourself. It's easy to get down on yourself because of that. And, and I'm sitting here telling you this, I still struggle with that. I know it, I understand it, but it doesn't mean that I've resolved it completely in my head. It's something that I've got to go through.
I remember, in my darkest moment, I had a suicide attempt, September 9th of, 2009. Chose that date specifically because in my head, 999 upside down was exactly where I was. Oh. And as I got into recovery, I too had that parade, and those I'm a person who hears voices. And so for me, it's a literal voice that tells me all these things. And that's what pushed and guided me and walked with me to the suicide attempt. And when the wolves start circling, because even 12 years into my journey and at the age of 54, my head still tries to tell me these maladapted, you suck, you're a piece of shit, you're not good enough, right? And I have a lot more tools today to kind of shut that down. But in the beginning, I had to find a counterbalance. I had to bring out and find some truth that could give me a moment where I could escape. And the movie scene I always resonated with was Lord of the Rings, and they're going up to the cave and the big spider's going to just attack Frodo. And earlier in the movie, the elves had given him that vial of light. And for me, that was truth. And the spider was my mental health and the depression and just ready to just take me out. And so I, at that point, probably 6 months sober, the truth that I could come up with that my head couldn't find a backdoor or say, no, that doesn't count, here's an exception, was there's some good in me. Not a lot, but there is some good because I have this guy in my life and this guy in my life, and I'm sober today. And so I'm wondering what truth that you do bring out when those images, voices, the band comes out of like shutting that down.
That's a good question. Because I do have those moments. I have those moments where I don't want to reach out because I want to stay where I'm at. I don't want help. I want to feel that. And for me, I think I would say that the one truth that I come to is that I'm a father, and I think about my children, and I know the type of father that I am. My children love me. I'm a good father. For all my faults,
I'm
Absolutely. A good father. I listen, and they need me. And that has pulled me through a lot of dark moments, because I think, what would they do if I wasn't here? And I think about losing my mother, and I know what that did to me. And it wasn't, I'll say too, it wasn't just losing my mother. There were other things as well that contributed to that, but that was kind of a catalyst. It was a huge, huge thing. But so I think about that, like, my children need me. So I've got to get through this moment, because sounds like when I get in those dark moments, I forget what it feels like to feel well. And when I'm well, I think, man, why do I ever feel like shit? Because this is great. I mean, this is positive. I feel hope. Or I just feel positive. I want to I can do good things. But then when I get low, really low, I just, it doesn't even seem worth it to climb out. Like, what do I got to climb out for,
But you do. So that was one of the things that I noted in your story about how you feel in the morning. You just get up and go. Mm-hmm. And by the time you get your juices flowing and you're out there living the day, it feels different. So that was a remarkable thing. I think a lot of people feel that, especially waking up in the morning. Mm-hmm. I hear that a ton.
Yeah.
And it's like, dude, I am completely empty. I don't even want to do anything.
Yeah.
And you're saying you just get up and go. And I love how you talk about, it's like you made friends with yourself. Mm-hmm. It's like you're being your own very best friend. You're being your own loving parent. You talking to yourself, going to rescue the 10-year-old, going to sit with him in his fear. And there's just some reassuring energy. I love that whole thing. And those are the kind of healing. That's, now I'm understanding why you can sit here today with this type of energy. You've done some work, man.
Yeah. And that's really, it's the parenting, it's that understanding, and nobody can do that for me, but me. My experience has been that when I make the decision to do this, and I'm honest and open with myself, then I start understanding things. I start seeing things and understanding what I need to do, even without the help of other people. No, I do need the help of other people. I do know that, but I start getting it, like going back and sitting with myself, my 10-year-old self. No one told me to do that. I just instinctively thought, I'm going to go do that. And coming to myself now and talking to myself, I just felt like that would be helpful. So my experience has been that as I've made this decision and as I've done the work, that I kind of know what I need, but I have to open myself up to it. And as long as I'm trying to delude myself or be delusional about all this, I'm never going to figure that out. And just the process of opening myself up and being vulnerable with myself and with others, I start to kind of get it. Now, then there's the process, then there's the need of actually now going out and doing it, but I understand it at least. And this poem I wanted to read today kind of talks about that. Can I read this right now? Is that
sure,
cool?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this poem is called Terrible Potential. And this poem I was just sitting there in my office one day. It was a tough day, and I was thinking, man, what am I even scared of? Because sometimes I think, what am I scared of? What have I been scared of my whole life? And I don't even know how to define it necessarily, but this poem just kind of came out of my head. And it says, here's what it says. So it's called Terrible Potential. It reads, I see it now. For years, I only sensed it or saw the dissipating dust tails of its approach, but it filled me with terror, and there was no cover or protection, so I ran as fast as my child's stride could take me. not even knowing what it was, only that it was coming. But that made the fear so much more in my little mind, so I ran harder until I forgot why I was running, only knowing that I couldn't stop. But I see it now. Its shape is fluid and undefined, and its terrible potential fills my mind. I want to keep running, retreating, but it won't stop, and it's closing the gap, and it's more terrible than I ever thought. But it's real. I see it now. And I know there's no escape. There never was. But I want to keep running anyway until it overtakes me. I won't see it coming. It'll just happen and be done. But my insufficient legs refuse to carry me anymore. So I prostrate myself as an offering. I know you're coming, I whisper, and I offer myself willingly. This is not defeat, I reassure myself. Then lower my eyes and brace for its fury. But my mind keeps moving defiantly. It knows truths that my body forgot and reminds me, you were born with claws, and they're with you still. And I remember and feel them. They are deep, but I feel them and they are there. So I raise my body from the dirt and my eyes to the distance. It is closer now, the gap disappearing, but not my fear. My fear is growing, broadcast loudly by my beating heart. But I no longer want to run, nor offer myself willingly. Instead, I watch it come and I wait. In fear, true, but I wait to receive it, and I steady myself. I have claws, and I feel them, and I will meet it face to face. I have terrible potential too. I feel it now. And
wow.
Thank you.
So what I'm trying to express in that poem is that I don't have to back down from this stuff. And I'm still scared. I mean, it's still scary. Maybe I get my ass kicked still, but I don't have to run anymore because I have claws. I have, in terrible potential, terrible. There's a lot of definitions of terrible, the great and terrible day, Ivan the Terrible. I mean, it's not necessarily a negative connotation. It's, I'm powerful. I can figure this out. And I get my ass kicked all the time, when I try to face this stuff, but facing it and getting your ass kicked, I think for me at least, has put me one step closer to, becoming who I want to be,
You're in the arena.
I'm in the arena, the man in the arena. Yeah, exactly.
You're in the arena.
And so I think it's so important for me to remember what I know, not what I feel. Because I feel a lot of, like, my emotions, the trauma in my body, it's there, and it will derail me if I focus on what I feel all the time. There are times when I have to focus on what I know, because my mind remembers what my body forgets.
Tell me some of that, and we'll wrap up here in a few, but tell me some of those. Give me 10 bullet points, 10 things that 10 things that you know about yourself, about life, the terrible potential. Tell me about.
Share your wisdom.
What is the knowing that helps you get out of these funky places?
The knowing that I do have claws, in the sense that I'm not
helpless.
I'm not helpless. I'm not helpless. Knowing that I've done it in the past and I can do it again. Remembering that.
Resilient.
Knowing that my children love me, and they love me because of my relationship with them. And so I've done something right. I haven't just been a pasty little passive guy sitting on a couch. I've been involved with them. And so I have value to add. I am valuable inherently. And I don't know if that's 10, but those are, I think, some of the...
I'm like, keep it coming.
Yeah. And I think that it doesn't matter what we do, as long as I'll speak for myself. I mean, for me, as long as I remember that, as long as I keep myself open, that is open to the fact that it's okay. I mean, everybody struggles. Remembering that as long as I stay open and vulnerable, things are going to be okay. I don't have to be top of the hill. I don't have to be the king of the hill. Here, especially this, is that I need to measure myself against myself. You know, and there's this great, we mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier, and I see his book up there on your shelf.
Mm-hmm.
There's this video that I found in this last February that he did. It's like an excerpt from a podcast that he was on, or some interview. And he said, and I found this February was a very dark time in my life, probably the darkest time ever in my life, even from when my mom passed away. And I found this video one day, and it's called, someone titled it "Transcend Yourself." And I listened to that on repeat. I had to start on YouTube. I had just over and over, like I would listen to it 10, 15 times in a row until I started really to really absorb everything he was saying. But I would cry when I would listen to it. It was so emotionally powerful to me. And the message was that life is tragedy. And then we or somebody else does something to make it even worse. So life is hard. It's tragic, period, for everybody. And we need something to set against that. And what do? We find meaning in our life. And we determine, this was the part that I really clung on to. We individually determine our own meaning in life, not somebody else's set of rules. That to me has been so powerful, because I have lived my life by what other people have told me was valuable and what's meaningful. And it is maybe to them, that's great, but I'm not them. And I need to measure myself against me. And I spent my whole life trying to measure up to what other people told me I should be. And it's not, I kept failing.
It's not genuine to you. Yeah.
And so I never would achieve it. And then and it was just a cycle. I would feel like depressed, like, oh man, I failed again. Well, I'm going to try harder. Well, I failed again. And so this video, this message that he was giving was that you are the only person you can measure yourself against. And he said, you need just be better today than you were yesterday. And he said, you need to have the humility to set the bar low enough. He said, I'm not saying don't aim or don't aim up, but set the bar low enough. If you're not a runner and you want to start running, your goal can't be, I'm going to run a marathon tomorrow.
Right. You've
got to set your goals. And I love that you have to have the humility to set your bar low enough. And I thought that's what I needed to hear right then. I am the measure of myself. What did I do yesterday? Okay, what can I do today that transcends yesterday? So he said, continual self-transcendence. Measure yourself against what you were yesterday. We can all do that. All of us. I'm not going to be a marathon runner tomorrow. Maybe I never will be, but I can walk 100 yards tomorrow. I didn't walk anything yesterday. We're going to walk a mile. It's to understand that for me was pivotal in my life to making changes that I'm making now, because I'm not trying to be what somebody else wants me to be. And I don't feel like I need to anymore. And I can say, you know what? I'm just going to do what I'm going to do.
I'm good.
Yeah, exactly.
Does any of that stuff overlap? So you're saying you've kind of abandoned some things that you were made to believe was important, but as I think of it like cleaning out your garage, you find some things you forgot you had, and you realize how much you wanted this. Some of this stuff, a bunch of it you throw away. And then did you come back to things that, you believed even from other people's perspective was important? Did you come back to any of that and say, yes, I do want to retain this part?
That's exactly what I've been doing. In fact, the way I've been describing it, and so I'm still taking inventory really at this point.
Right.
I haven't thrown anything away. I've just kind of stepped back, and I'm reevaluating everything, because I recognize that there are a lot of parts of my life that were unhealthy. Like for instance, with religion, or religious beliefs, I haven't thrown anything or stepped away from anything. But what I've done is I've stepped back because my relationship was unhealthy. It was more of a codependent relationship. It was apparent to me.
Can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah. And so I thought, okay, I got to step back here. Let me look at this, and I'm going to reevaluate my relationship because I want it to be a healthy one. Because it was not healthy. It was more, like I said, it was it was apparent to me rather than a religious faith. And so I've been doing that with a lot of areas of my life. And so I'm still in the process of inventory taking. I haven't thrown anything away, but I'm evaluating.
Dude, I love this guy.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're here. When Jimmy talked about this, I was like, wait, what? Why are we doing this? I don't understand. And then I listened to the podcast, and then I listened to the first episode, and then one about my father's son.
Oh yeah, the Hemingway one. Yeah,
that was so good, and I learned a ton about Hemingway from that. Anyway, you have clearly figured some things out, and I know you're still talking about you're on this process. But I spend 50 hours a week with still broken people. And even if you feel that way sometimes, man, you do have some gifts. You do have light you're bringing. You do have purpose. I mean, and Jimmy's right, doing this right now. We talk about the need for tribe and the need that men need other men. And so we want to feature people because there's some jackass out there who's listening to this right now who he's not ready to go to therapy. He doesn't want to open up to his friends if he has any or important people, but he'll listen to this. And he probably has gotten goosebumps a time or two today to listen to what you've shared, man. This is, I am so very happy that we did this. It's Saturday morning. This guy's all warmed up because he's already recorded 2 podcasts this weekend. And this has been a shocker of just meaningful to hear what you've done. It's wild how you can.
Well, first of all, I appreciate being able to talk because, I'm an attorney by trade, but I've felt this push, this drive inside of myself to share this because I feel like, I feel like I do have a lot to share. I mean, I don't want anybody to get any ideas that I'm like smooth and running because I've got a lot of, I understand stuff, but I'm still working to integrate it.
Still living life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I get it. That's the thing is I understand it. I'm able to synthesize all this stuff into my life and I feel like I'm able to communicate it well. And so I feel like I have a purpose that I need to be talking about this for the same reason, for that jackass you're talking about. I want people to recognize that, hey, it's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable because that's the only way for me. That was the only way for me to really make changes was to be vulnerable. And I don't mean just say, because I've always admitted that I was screwed up, but I did it in a self-destructive way. It wasn't a vulnerable way in which I was trying to fix myself. It was a way to say, yes, I know I hurt you. I'm a piece of shit. I know that. It was very self-destructive. But so in my mind, I think of vulnerability as I'm broken, but I'm valuable. I'm not a piece of shit. That's to be vulnerable.
It's redefining how we define us as men.
Yeah.
And it's not just that we provide, or we're a loser. Mm-hmm. It's changing that construct. And that's what I love about the Alpha Quorum is, and you coming here, is us as men teaching the younger generation that the way through is to be vulnerable, is to be in connection with your emotions, is to share those emotions, it's okay to cry. Yeah. Like if you want to be a stay-at-home dad or a CEO or anything in between, then we need to leave space for that. It's not just man up, knuckle drag, you don't show emotion and power through it because that's not working.
Right.
And
I have a request though. If you come up with this, Mr. Wordsmith, I'll send you an Alpha Quorum hat. For some reason, I'm so bothered by the term vulnerable. Maybe that's a sign of my, invulnerability or whatever. But when I think of vulnerable, I think of, the armpit of the knight's armor, that you can get them under there because there's no iron, there's no steel or whatever there. And that vulnerability, I get the concept, but I am still looking for a new word, a new way to say that. I guess I've liked transparency, but I in my mind, it kind of associates that with Obama, and I don't want to do that.
Transparency is passive.
Okay.
So
is vulnerability?
Vulnerability is more active because you're doing something. You're making yourself vulnerable, I think. But I think of transparency as a passive, and this is not a passive pursuit we're in. It's not, we're not just sitting back.
You can't be passive in the arena.
No, you can't. I'll think about it.
Thank you, Scott.
You are so awesome to be here with us. You've got a short time in Vegas. You want to spend some of that time on a Saturday morning with us. Thank you so much, man.
I appreciate it. This has been great.
Please come back.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Tell us how we get, and I'll post links and everything, but how do we get to your podcast and other?
Yeah. So the podcast is The Poet Delayed. It's Poet and then in parentheses Delayed. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Amazon, Google. And then my book is on Amazon. It's called My Mother Sleeps. And, and you can look, I think I've got an author page. So I've got 2 books. I've got My Mother Sleeps. And then I took one of the poems, the real long one on becoming a black hole, and made that a standalone little 40-pager.
The book is on Kindle, or you have the paperbacks?
It's just paperback now, but I've got to do the Kindle format. So I'll try to do that this week, but it's paperback if you want a paperback copy.
Dude, thank you for being with us. I really appreciate you being here. You guys, until next time, no excuses. Alpha up.
Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.
That was so good, man.